56% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency without going into debt. That is not a poverty statistic. That is a middle-income statistic. People with good salaries, decent jobs, and full lives are one unexpected expense away from financial collapse. Not because they are irresponsible, but because nobody ever showed them the quiet mechanics of how money actually works against you. When you are not paying attention, most people believe poverty is about not earning enough. That is the assumption almost everyone carries into adulthood. Work harder, earn more, and eventually the stress goes away. But here is what the data actually shows. The majority of people who stay financially stuck are not stuck because their income is too low. They are stuck because the system they are living inside was never designed to move them forward, and most of them have no idea that system even exists. My name is Sloan, and in this video I want to walk you through the real reason most people stay poor. And more importantly, why most of them never even realize it is happening. This is not about budgeting tips. This is about understanding the invisible architecture that keeps ordinary people financially frozen, and the specific shifts that change everything. The problem starts with what we were taught to measure. From the time most of us were old enough to understand money, the signal we received from everywhere, from advertising, from social media, from the neighborhoods we grew up in, was that financial success looks like something. It looks like a car. It looks like a wardrobe. It looks like a vacation. And because we internalized that signal so completely, we started spending our financial lives performing success rather than building it. The real problem is not what people earn. The real problem is what people believe wealth looks like versus what it actually is. And those two things are almost completely opposite. Wealth is not visible. Wealth is not loud. Wealth is the gap between what you earn and what you owe, what economists call your financial margin. And most people spend their entire adult lives systematically eliminating that margin in exchange for the appearance of success. Here is the reframe that changes everything. Poverty is not just a number. Poverty is a condition of zero margin. You can earn $70,000 a year and be financially poor. You can earn $120,000 a year and still be one missed paycheck from crisis. And if you look at the data, that is exactly where a staggering number of middle-income households actually sit. Income that looks fine on paper, obligations that quietly consume every dollar of it, and a margin so thin that a single disruption sends the whole thing sideways. The first trap that keeps most people financially stuck is one that does not feel like a trap at all. It feels like progress. It is called lifestyle inflation. And it operates so gradually, so socially acceptably, that most people never identify it as the source of their financial stagnation. Here is how it works. You get a raise. Maybe it is $4,000 a year. You have been careful with money. You feel like you deserve a small upgrade. And so you make one reasonable adjustment. Maybe you move to a nicer apartment, and now your rent is $400 more per month. That is $4,800 a year, already exceeding the raise. But because it happened gradually, because each individual decision felt reasonable, your brain never registers the compound effect of what just occurred. And this is where the hidden cost arrives. Because lifestyle inflation does not stop at rent. It filters into everything. A slightly nicer car, more frequent delivery orders, a gym membership you did not have before, better vacations because you feel like you have finally earned them. Researchers studying household spending patterns have found that for every dollar increase in income, the average household increases its spending by nearly 90 cents. Meaning they are saving roughly 10 cents of every additional dollar they earn. Over 10 years, this means someone who received steady raises their entire career can arrive in their early 40s with almost exactly the same financial margin they had in their 20s. Because every income increase was quietly absorbed by lifestyle upgrades that felt completely rational in the moment. The trap does not announce itself. It disguises itself as reward. The people who quietly build wealth during this same period do something that looks almost antisocial by comparison. When their income increases, they hold their lifestyle flat for a period of time and redirect the difference towards something that compounds, not forever, yet just long enough to widen the margin before expanding the lifestyle. That one behavioral difference, the pause between earning more and spending more, is responsible for more wealth separation between ordinary earners than almost any other single factor. Now let us go deeper, because there is a version of this trap that is even harder to see, and it lives inside what most people would consider a very comfortable income. It is called high-income poverty, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You can earn more money than 90% of households around you and still be functionally broke at the end of every month. Consider a household earning $100,000 a year. Before that income arrives in their bank account, roughly 28% is already gone to federal and state taxes. That leaves approximately $72,000 or $6,000 per month. Now layer in the obligations that a $100,000 lifestyle typically carries: a mortgage or rent designed for that income bracket, 2 car payments because that is what the neighborhood expects, private school tuition because the school district seemed necessary when they bought the house, and a full suite of subscription services, insurance premiums, and revolving credit card balances. And suddenly the $6,000 monthly income is essentially fully committed before a single dollar reaches savings. The household is not struggling in any visible sense. They look comfortable, they feel mostly fine, but they have zero financial resilience. One layoff, one medical event, one transmission failure, and the entire structure collapses into debt. This is the high-income poverty trap. And the mechanism that drives it is not recklessness. It is obligation creep. Every individual obligation made sense when it was taken on. The house made sense. The cars made sense. The school made sense. But the cumulative weight of every sensible decision is a monthly obligation load that consumes the entire income and leaves the household financially fragile despite appearing financially successful. The data on this is striking. Studies have shown that households earning between $75,000 and $150,000 per year carry some of the highest consumer debt-to-income ratios of any income group, precisely because their income is high enough to qualify for large obligations, but not high enough to absorb them without strain. And this is the moment where the real problem comes into focus. Because if you look at everything we have covered so far, the lifestyle inflation, the obligation creep, the high-income poverty cycle, you start to notice something that is almost impossible to unsee. None of this is about intelligence. None of this is about effort. Most of the people inside these traps are working hard, making decisions that seem completely reasonable, and genuinely believing that they are managing their money well. The problem is not behavior. The problem is identity. Most people are not consciously trying to build wealth. They are trying to signal that they have arrived. And because the signal of arrival in our culture is almost entirely expressed through spending, through what you drive, where you live, what your children wear to school, where you vacation, the act of building real wealth, which requires the deliberate, invisible accumulation of assets over time, feels like failure by comparison. People who quietly build wealth often look ordinary. They drive reasonable cars. They live in houses that do not impress visitors. They say no to things their peer group says yes to. And the psychological cost of that, the social friction, the quiet embarrassment, the low-grade worry that you are missing something everyone else has, is what makes the wealth-building path so difficult to stay on. It is not the math that stops people. It is the identity cost. There is a third force at work here that almost never gets discussed plainly, and it is the structural gap in financial education that most people carry into adulthood without ever knowing it is there. Think about the education system that produced most working adults today. 12 years of formal schooling, mathematics, history, literature, science, not a single required class on compound interest, credit mechanics, tax strategy, or the difference between an asset and a liability. The average person graduates high school having studied the causes of World War I in more detail than they have ever examined how a mortgage amortization schedule actually works, meaning they have no idea how much of their first 10 years of payments goes to interest rather than principal. Is on a standard 30-year mortgage at 6% interest. In the first year of payments, roughly 80% of every dollar paid goes toward interest. The homeowner believes they are building equity, and they are, but almost imperceptibly slowly in the early years. Over the full life of that loan, a $300,000 home costs the buyer nearly $600,000 in total payments when interest is included. That is not a secret. It is public math. But because nobody was ever taught to read an amortization table, most homeowners go years without ever running those numbers. The knowledge gap does not just affect mortgages. It affects every financial product ordinary people interact with. Credit cards with compound interest structures designed to maximize minimum payment cycles, and car loans that begin depreciating the moment you drive off the lot. Retirement accounts that most people contribute to without understanding their allocation or fee structure. The system is not conspiring against ordinary people. It is simply designed by people who understand these mechanics deeply, for customers who were never taught them at all. So here is the question that actually matters. If these are the traps, lifestyle inflation, obligation creep, and the structural knowledge gap, what does the exit actually look like in practical terms? Because this is where most financial content either becomes vague or becomes hype, and I want to be direct with you. The path out of financial stagnation does not begin with an investment. It does not begin with a side hustle. It begins with margin. And here is what building margin actually requires in sequence. The first step is the one most people never take. A complete, honest accounting of your monthly obligation load. Not your spending, your obligations. The fixed costs that leave your account whether you do anything or not. Mortgage or rent, car payments, insurance, subscriptions, debt minimums. When you lay those numbers out in one place, you will often find that the margin you believed you had is significantly smaller than you assumed. And sometimes it is negative without the use of credit. The second step is not to invest, not to launch a business, not to optimize your portfolio. It is to build a 12-month runway of financial margin. This means getting your monthly obligations low enough that your income exceeds your total obligations by a meaningful amount, consistently over time. The psychological research on this is unambiguous. Households with genuine financial margin make dramatically better long-term decisions because they are not making choices from a state of scarcity and stress. Research from Princeton and Harvard found that financial scarcity impairs cognitive function in ways comparable to losing over a dozen IQ points. People operating from financial anxiety are not being irrational. They are operating under a cognitive load that makes clear long-term thinking genuinely harder. The solution is not willpower. The solution is structural margin. The third step is the one that actually builds wealth, and it is deceptively simple. Before you expand your lifestyle to meet any income increase, you direct the new margin into assets that compound over time. Index funds, retirement contributions, debt payoff that frees future cash flow, real estate equity. The specific vehicle matters less than the consistency and the sequencing, meaning that the wealth-building habit is established before the lifestyle upgrade, not after. This framework is not exciting. It does not promise a timeline. It does not tell you that you will be wealthy by a specific year. What it does is remove the three structural forces: inflation trap, obligation creep, knowledge gap, that keep most people financially frozen, and replace them with a system that is directionally correct and compoundable over time. That is the actual mechanics of how ordinary people build quiet, durable wealth. I want to leave you with the observation that I think explains all of this most clearly. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The people in your life who appear the wealthiest are often not the wealthiest. The people who appear to be struggling are sometimes the ones quietly winning. And the behaviors that our culture associates with financial success, the visible consumption, the lifestyle upgrades, the constant optimization of appearance, are almost perfectly inverted from the behaviors that actually produce financial security. Looking wealthy requires continuous spending. Building wealth requires continuous restraint. Looking wealthy produces social validation. Building wealth produces future freedom. Looking wealthy feels urgent because status decays if you stop maintaining it. Building wealth feels slow because the results are invisible for years before they become undeniable. The financial psychology research on this is consistent across decades and income levels. Households that delay lifestyle upgrades in favor of asset accumulation consistently report lower financial stress, higher net worth at retirement, and greater reported life satisfaction over time. Not because they sacrificed, but because they eventually reached a financial position where the obligations were low and the assets were high, and that asymmetry creates a quality of life that no amount of visible consumption can replicate. The gap between those two numbers, $200,000 versus $800,000, is not luck. It is not income difference. It is the compounded result of one behavioral pattern applied consistently over 2 decades. That is the math that most people are never shown. Most people stay poor not because they are unlucky, not because they do not work hard, and not because the system is entirely beyond their influence. They stay poor because they were given a false map. They were shown a version of financial success that requires constant spending to maintain, and nobody ever handed them the real map, the one that shows that wealth is not a performance, it is a structure. And structures are built quietly over time, with consistent, unglamorous decisions that nobody around you will applaud. The goal is not to look wealthy. The goal is to build a life that is financially difficult to break. One where your obligations are low, your assets are compounding, your margin is real, and your decisions are coming from clarity rather than scarcity. That shift does not start with a product, an account, or an investment. It starts with understanding the system you are actually living inside, and now you do. If this gave you something useful to think about, share it with someone who needs it. And if you want to go deeper into the specific mechanics of how these systems work, subscribe. Because that is exactly what this channel is for.